Testing. Yeah, okay, good. Good morning. So we're in the towards the end of chapter 31, page 426 here. Okay, so we're in the middle of discussing how the person who's has a godly soul, but it's in a body, and the body during the time while he's trying to serve God, his body maintains its previous nature, trying to pull the person down. So just because the person's body is being pulled in a different direction doesn't mean they shouldn't be happy with his opportunities to fulfill mitzvahs, to do what it is Hashem wants. So we were talking in a very personal way. Today, the Alter Rebbe, although you just did a parody on Purim, today we're going to talk a little bit about Pesach. And we're going to talk about a time when collectively we all experienced something like what we're talking about in Tanya. And Alter Rebbe will learn from there how we should act when we encounter something of this sort. So everyone here is familiar more or less with the story of the Exodus of Egypt. We just studied it in the Torah portions in the last couple months, last couple weeks, and well, not the last couple weeks, but a month or two ago, and also in the Haggadah that we say every year. So when the Jewish people left Egypt, it's very clear that they ran away, right? Because they didn't even have time to let the dough rise and turn into matzah. How long does it take the dough to rise? What, 18 minutes? A little more, a half hour? In other words, they were dealing with minutes that they were trying to escape Egypt so quickly. And if you think about it, we never questioned that. We always just assumed this is, you're slaves. Finally, you're let free. Go as fast as you can. But really, what were the chances that Pharaoh would go back on his permission to let them leave?
Pretty high.
Really?
Every up in the first 9 plagues, he changed his mind all the time.
Right. But what do you see from that? From the fact that for an entire year, God is sort of playing the slow game, right? Every plague lasts for a month. 1 week is the warning. 3 weeks are warning. 1 week is the plague. The whole year you have plagues. Pharaoh goes back and forth. At a certain point, the verse is pretty clear. Pharaoh doesn't have choices anymore. God is hardening his heart. God's controlling what he's feeling.
He doesn't want him to decide yet.
Right. He wants to hit him harder. So now God gives Pharaoh the heart to let the Jewish people go. Why should we assume that God doesn't have to take his time here too? I mean, we all know God could have taken the Jews out a year earlier. The day he sent Moses to Pharaoh, God could have started with the death of the firstborn, or just tweaked Pharaoh's heart a bit, and Pharaoh would have let the Jewish people go. God can do that. If he can split the sea and bring all the plagues, he can do that, right? But God was playing the slow game for whatever reason. Suddenly here, Pharaoh says the okay, and suddenly we don't even have enough time to let the dough rise? Where's the hurry? Just on a practical sense. Again, this isn't an earth-shattering question, but it's just if you think about the story, it raises an eyebrow. Well, we have to suffer for 3,300 years to, how hard it is to work on Pesach to get rid of all the chametz and to eat matzah? Why? Because they couldn't wait an extra 10 minutes to let the dough rise? Was it that?
Yeah, but I think that God did this with the whole thing on purpose because that was a symbol that would carry on for generations.
Yeah, but
the reminder of.
So you're saying he did that in order to get them to eat to this matzah state, so that we would eat matzah till today.
Right.
Well, wasn't matzah also? It was like an oni, right?
Correct.
That's what they were eating, and before they even left.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So today it might look like a pita or some variation of that. I think Sephardim actually do some sort of.
Not for the matzah by the Seder. The matzah by the Seder has to be poor man's bread.
Right. But
That's called lechem ashir, a rich man's bread.
oh, okay.
So it's not leavened, but it's not a poor man's bread. Slaves ate poor man's bread, which is matzah. So you're technically correct, but the verse is pretty clear that this is their opportunity to make regular bread, and they're not given the time. God is sending them out. They're running. The verse is very clear. They did not have time. They couldn't let their dough rise, right? In other words, what would be the purpose? You could theorize what the purpose could be in making the Jews do this so that they can eat matzah and we can celebrate but is it necessary to do it that way? And if it is, you got to explain why this way. Because God could have done a million things. We have to understand why this and not something else.
But the thing too is, bread would be moldy in a week. Matzah can go for a year and not have a problem.
Yeah, but a month later they were already done the matzah and God had to bring them food from heaven.
Right.
They weren't going. They were going with a few days worth. They didn't bake bread every few days. They ate stale bread back then.
Right.
I think. Huh?
When Moses said, "Hey, we just want to go for 3 days."
Exactly.
You know. Or, I mean, was that?
But either way, it seems quite odd. Again, it's not a question. It's not like a contradiction. It's just we have to understand why God did it this way. So the Alter Rebbe explains like this: that Egypt is not just a physical place. It's a spiritual idea. Egypt represents time. It says Egypt was the most immoral place on earth. We all know what happened when Abraham and Sarah went there, what they were willing to do to Abraham to get Sarah for the king. So this wasn't a very moral place to be. What happens when the Jewish people are there for over 200 years? They become stooped in immorality. They become a part of the immorality of Egypt. So much so that it says there are 50 gates of impurity, and the Jewish people were at level 49. If they would have stayed for one more minute, they would have been stuck there forever. They would have become part and parcel of Egypt. So when God suddenly appears, night of the Seder, right? They saw the miracles, but they didn't see God. The night of the Seder, it says God himself came down on the homes and passed over the homes of the Jews, and they saw God's presence. They're freed. There's a major internal conflict going on. It's like the Jew that's conflicted. I just bought a house 5 miles away from the shul. Should I sell it? But I want to keep Shabbos. Should I sell it and move closer to the shul? They live. This is their home. This is their life. From their body's perspective, they're 49 steps down a 50-step ladder into Egypt. They have no interest in leaving here whatsoever. However, they have a soul. And the soul sees God, and the soul hears God wants to take them out, and the soul wants to go. But the body doesn't. So how do you resolve this conflict? So till now, we discussed, we use meditation, we use all these tools. The beginning of the chapter, we said, don't worry about the body wanting to stay. Just do the mitzvah and be happy with the mitzvah, yeah? But here, there's no time. There's two diametrically opposed choices to make. Stay in Egypt or go. The body wants to stay, the soul wants to go. What are you going to do? You got to pick one. And in this moment, there is no time to make decisions. There is no time to contemplate and to think. You have to just pick up and run. If you feel the smallest inkling that you're in the wrong place, get up and run, because you stay for another minute, you might change your mind.
Right.
Unfortunately, there are in Israel there are quite a few Jewish women that fall in love with the Jews and Arabs live together in most of Israel. There's a lot of Israeli Arabs, and you fall in love with an Arab, and then somehow they end up in Arab villages and they get stuck there. They can't leave. There are organizations that are deal with women that reach out, that want help getting out, to help them leave. First of all, it's physical danger to get away from from the family and to relocate them so that they shouldn't be found again. But the premise of these organizations is urgency and being very, very quick. Because when they get a phone call that a woman wants to leave, the likelihood of that woman calling back 5 minutes later saying she changed her mind is very low. We know what happens in abusive relationships, right? They call 911 and the police come and they never mind, not pressing charges, right? So when you're in this situation where on the one hand, your whole body knows it has to leave, but your whole body also knows it really wants to stay. Your whole body really wants to stay, but it also knows with the same conviction of it has to leave. What do you do in that situation? So the minute there's like a moment of clarity, you pick yourself up and run away. Because you know if you start thinking a little, you might end up staying. And this is the depth of what it means. If we say in the Haggadah, if God wouldn't have taken us out of Egypt, then us and our children, our grandchildren would still be slaves in Egypt. What does that mean? It doesn't. So literally, the simple meaning is, if God wouldn't have freed us, we would still be here, right? We would still be there. But what we're saying, what Alter Rebbe is explaining is, if God wouldn't have literally made us run away, we would have stayed there one more minute. We would have never had that moment of clarity again, and we would have on our own stayed in Egypt. We would have never wanted to leave after that, if God didn't take us out at the last minute. And we have that in Torah also. You know, you have the slave, that Jewish slave that can become a servant for 6 years, and then God says he's free, and he says he wants to stay. Yeah, a person can choose to stay in slavery. People do that. Once you're 210 years in slavery, the allure of that to a slave is it could be very appealing. When we left Egypt, we had nothing, spiritually speaking. The guy who had the brother who went to his brother's wedding, his brother's daughter's wedding, had pajamas on. We didn't even have pajamas on when we left Egypt. We had nothing. We were 49 steps in impurity. We had nothing to distinguish us from the Egyptians. So God gave us a few mitzvahs. Which mitzvahs did he give us that night? Bris, right? And the Passover sacrifice. And we took the blood of those two mitzvahs, smeared it on our doors, and that's what sort of made us stand out. That's what protected us. Those were our pajamas. Compared to the 630 mitzvahs that were to come, this is nothing, yeah? So we had something to leave with. Now, we know why that had to happen, but what was one of the consequences of that type of escape? It's a beautiful thing, right? You're slaves. You're not going to be able to leave on your own. You're never going to make the decision to get up and leave. Someone's coming and ready to hold your hand and take you out. You have a moment of clarity. You grab their hand and you run. What's the downside of that type of escape? What's the downside of that type of redemption?
You haven't had time to think it through.
So you left Egypt, but Egypt didn't leave you. You left with all the baggage you have, you left with. True, you're not a slave. There's no question there's a redemption. The problem is, together with the soul, you redeemed the body too, with all the baggage it carries. So now the Jewish people come to the sea, and they see an obstacle, and they think, okay, God brought us here to die. What happened? God just took you out of Egypt. You don't think he can get you across the sea? They cross the sea. They see all the gold and silver and all the diamonds that come up from the Egyptians that were drowned. And Moses says, we got to go to get the Torah, and they're busy collecting money. They get the Torah. 40 days later, they build a golden calf. There's still a lot of Egyptian mentality in them because they ran away. They didn't have time to sort of grow up and grow out of everything they left behind. So it would seem the better way to deal with it is go slowly, work on it slowly, one mitzvah at a time, grow. And usually we like to do it that way. Someone wants to explore their Yiddishkeit, their Judaism. Someone wants to grow in Judaism. Take baby steps, one step at a time. But every once in a while, the body is such an obstacle to the soul doing a mitzvah that you can't rationalize, and you have to just run away. What happens though? When you run away, the body runs with you. And then you have to deal with this dichotomy again, where you're running away, you're excited to do the mitzvah, but at the same time, you have all of these old naggings and old urges pulling you back, and you really have to learn how to be happy while at the same time knowing that technically you still have like a slave mentality. So someone who never did mitzvahs, didn't know much about Judaism, wants to start growing, he has to learn how to be happy with the mitzvahs he's doing, knowing there's a lot he isn't doing, knowing there's a lot that's still stuck with him that he may want to get rid of, but can't obviously do it all at once. But we have to learn how to enjoy and appreciate the opportunities to do the mitzvahs we can do and the mitzvahs we do, not letting those negative feelings from the past drag us down, because then there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere. No. So we have to run away, and at the same time fix things slowly but surely.
Is this a battle between the godly soul and the animal soul?
Yeah.
That's really what it all boils down
Yeah,
to, right?
but it's not just it's a battle that's active. They're both very active. And when they're both very active, it's very hard when you're fighting an enemy. So when the enemy stops attacking because they've run out of munitions, you don't celebrate victory because you know that they're going to go back and get more. But you're able to take a breather. You're able to calm down a bit. But while the enemy is firing, it's very hard to pay attention to the victories you're having. It's very hard to be happy with the gains you've made. And that's the problem. The Beinoni is in a place where, although he has to be wary of attacks at any moment, he's able to appreciate the accomplishments he's made. But the average person that struggles on a daily basis with doing the mitzvahs and not sinning, it's very hard to be happy in serving God because the enemy is constantly firing shots at you. You're constantly on the defensive while trying to be on the offensive as well. And it's not always working. You're being hit, you're being pelted. How could you be happy in that situation? Now, it's not why should you be happy? You should be happy because you made gains. The question is, how could you be happy? And that's what we have to teach ourselves how to do, how to allow ourselves to appreciate those opportunities to do the mitzvahs while at the same time not taking our guard down or not being dragged down by the bullets that are hitting us from all the other sides.
But doesn't also, there were blockades put up, the sea, no food, that gave God the ability to fix something, to show them, I'm behind you, I'm with you. So these different blockades that he fixed along the way were necessary. Otherwise, they would have went back.
Right. In other words, they were there to help them slowly but surely, gradually come to trust God. They trusted God. They ran into the desert with nothing. That was a tremendous, but it was in a moment of clarity. We all do that. We make New Year's resolutions. It's a moment of clarity. What happens day 3 and 4? Why aren't we keeping it? What do you mean? Because that's not who we are. We would never, January 4th, you're not making the resolution you made on January 1st. So why did you make it January 1st? Because you are really capable of it. But it was a moment, so they had a moment of clarity and they took it. They ran with God out of Egypt. The moment after they're out of Egypt, now they have to start dealing with all the baggage they brought with them. Okay, let's see a little bit of this inside. 426. You know what? Let's go back to the last paragraph on. You know what? Let's start a little. 425 in the third paragraph. Like towards the middle. True. The paragraph starts true. True. The body remains abominable and loathsome. And as the Zohar says, it is called a serpent skin, since the essential character of the animal soul has not been transformed to good, so that it might be absorbed into the realm of holiness. Only a tzaddik does this. Mm-hmm. Yet, even though he still has this abominable body, let his divine soul be more precious to him than his loathsome body, so that he rejoices in the soul's joy at its liberation. How is it liberated? Through the observance of the Torah and the mitzvot. It's liberated from the exile of the body. You have a body that's making you sad without letting the sadness on account of the lowly state of his body interfere with or disturb the joy of the soul. We have to figure out we have to learn how to do that. Takes practice. This form of divine service, in which the divine soul breaks free of its exile within the body, while the body and animal soul remain in their lowly state, is analogous to the Exodus from Egypt, of which it is written that the people escaped. So at first glance, it seems strange. Why should it have been so? In a manner of flight? Had they demanded of Pharaoh that he set them free forever? Would he not have been forced to do so? Haven't been stricken by the plagues? In other words, Moses said, let us go for 3 days. But let's say at that moment, Moses would have said, I changed my mind. Let's go forever. Would Pharaoh not have been forced to say yes? After the plague of the firstborn, he was scared of his own death. Of course he would have said yes. God was controlling him at that point. Of course he would have said yes. So why did they escape? But escape was necessary because the evil in the animal soul of Israel was still strong in the left part of the heart, which is the seat of the animal soul, as we discussed in chapter 9. For their impurity, in other words, the impurity of Klippa that the Jews had, did not cease until the giving of the Torah. That's why they had 49 days to count, because there were 49 levels of impurity that they were stooped in. They had to get out of those 49 levels of impurity. So they had 49 days to elevate themselves until when they received the Torah, they were pure. Yet, their aim and desire was that their divine soul leave the exile of the Sitra Achra, the impurity of Egypt, and that it cleave to God. Even though their bodies were still stooped in Klippa. But their soul just wanted to get out of Egypt as quick as possible. So it is written that there is a divine service which consists of the divine soul's escape from the impurity of the body and animal soul. What does it say? If he quotes a few verses here, God is my strength and my fortress, my refuge in the day of affliction. He is my high tower and my refuge, and he is my escape. In other words, there are times when we run to God, when we have to escape, and we can't use the meditative process that Alter Rebbe Chassidus usually prescribes. Hence, it is written, now we're going to compare and contrast the exodus from Egypt to the future redemption. It is written of the future redemption, which will take place in the time to come, when God will remove the spirit of impurity of the earth, and there will therefore be no evil necessitating spiritual escape. What does it say? You will not go out in haste, nor go in flight, for God will go before you. This is a part of Isaiah's prophecy of Mashiach, that comparing with Egypt, we ran away. When Mashiach comes, we won't run. Because what does it say? One of the prophecies of Mashiach, that God will remove the spirit of impurity from the world. Once there's no impurity, there's nothing to run away from. It's all a matter of following God. So then you go slowly so that you can grow and improve and change. They tell the metaphor of a person who had trauma from 2 days a year. He would get a trauma twice a year. Once was on the eve of Passover. It was the night before Passover when you check for the chametz. He's like OCD about it. Maybe he missed a piece of chametz. Maybe he forgot to check a place. He would lose sleep over it. Did he do it right? The other time was the eve of Yom Kippur. The night before Yom Kippur, early in the morning, there's a tradition of taking a chicken, kaparas, and swinging it over your head 3 times, and part of the atonement process. And he was always nervous that while he was swinging the chicken over his head, the chicken would relieve itself, the rooster, and he'd get dirty. And for days before, he would lose sleep. Though one year he decided, you know what? If the chicken does it on him, he'll just wash himself and move on. And Chassidim would always use this as sort of a metaphor that, our whole lives, we tend, again, assuming we're just on cruise control. There are certain things that make us worried and make us concerned, and we try to avoid them at all costs. But at a certain point, we grow up and we realize we'll never be able to avoid these things at all costs. Let me make sure I'm in the best position possible that if something happens, I can brush off and move on. Yeah? So can you control whether you'll be in a car accident for your whole life? No. So what do? We get car insurance, we wear a seatbelt. It seems strange. Every person gets in the car, puts on the seatbelt. You're expecting to get in a car crash. Why are you putting on a seatbelt? Aren't you a safe driver? No, because we know it's not something we try to avoid at all costs. But every time you get into your car, you're basically putting yourself in a position. You're basically saying, I might be in a car crash. Yeah. In other words, in everything in life, we learn to accept that the inevitable might happen. Well, if it's not inevitable, but the things we fear the most might happen. So instead of worrying about ensuring they don't happen, which we should try to do to the best of our ability, but not to the extent that we lose sleep over it. Let's put ourselves in a position that we can get up and brush ourselves off. Yeah. So, we do mitzvahs. Yes, the body gets in the way sometimes. Yes, the animal soul gets in the way sometimes. But we can't let that dampen the joy that we have when we're able to perform a mitzvah, when we actually do overcome the animal soul. We have to grow up a little. And I don't mean that in a childish way. We have to mature in our thinking and realize that God isn't going to hit you on the head if you didn't do the mitzvah one day, and therefore I have to be so nervous every other time I do the mitzvah, because if one time I forget, God's going to kill me. We have to be worried about what happens when we don't do a mitzvah, but not at the expense of experiencing the joy every other time we do the mitzvah. Because if you don't experience joy, you're not really doing the mitzvah. You're just doing it because you're told to. Who wants to tell someone to do something? No parent wants to tell their kid to do something and realize the kid's only doing it because the parent said so. The parent wants the kid to do it because it's the right thing to do. Sure, at a very young age, you have to threaten the kid so the kid learns that they have to listen. But do you want the kid to grow up scared of their parents? That's probably the biggest nightmare any parent has, that the child shouldn't feel comfortable with them, right?
You hear that all the time. Oh, my parents made me go to Hebrew school.
It's the worst.
You got it.
And you know what? Okay, no one. It's not relevant for anyone here, and so we won't say it. Well,
Okay.
we'll do it afterward. If I remember afterwards, I have a comment about that. What?
Okay, so, you didn't go to a yeshiva. You went to
After school.
public school.
Yeah, public school.
So
and
you always
afterwards went to-
had to be thinking, I don't wanna go to Hebrew school. Do your children experience that kind of anguish where they say, I don't wanna go to school?
The same way.
Right,
The same way.
Because they don't have a concept of not going and learning Hebrew.
Right. Well, my kids go to school the same way any other kid goes to public school or private school. The day a kid wakes up and doesn't want to go to school, my kid wake up someday and not interested in going to school. They're having a test. They're worried. It's a regular school.
Right.
It's just the subjects that, oh,
They don't have the
An extra.
additional
so,
Wednesday night is
so,
Torah study.
right. But I think there's another component here, and I don't want this to come across as bashing parents, because I don't think that. And I don't want it to come across as being judgmental of people, because this isn't a rule. This isn't, but I have taught Hebrew school for many years, and I've seen the times change a bit. And I have a feeling, I haven't questioned parents to see if this is true, but this is from my observation. When I started teaching in Hebrew school about 12 years ago, basically all the kids came every week. As the years went on, slowly but surely, kids started missing weeks here and there. And it turns out that they missed weeks because there were conflicts with other things that were going on, usually seasonal, if there's sports or other practices or things that happen. In my experience, for the most part, when the kids would come every single week, I never heard from a kid, my parents made me come to Hebrew school. Why? Because the parents made a choice. This is what's important. So if there's a conflict between practice and Hebrew school, we're going to send them to Hebrew school. This is a priority. Yeah. So the kids never looked at that and said, my parents are making me, just like a kid doesn't say, my parents make me go to school, or they make me eat, or they make me bathe, or they make me clean up. Why? Because this is just what you do every day.
It's their lifestyle.
Right. But once the parents say, you know what, if there's a conflict with baseball or Hebrew school, you go to baseball. So now when there's no baseball, suddenly I have to go to Hebrew school? Suddenly it's important? It's not important for you every other week. Suddenly it's important. Now you're going to make me go. So now you're making me go because you don't really think I need to do it. If you think I really need to, now the kid isn't obviously consciously thinking through this, but they get it. Kids are very perceptive about what parents want them to do. Kids know when a parent's angry, when a parent's doing something they don't want to do, or when a parent is, right? Kids understand this. So yeah, my kids have to do extra things when they come home. Things in prayers that they don't get to do that they don't do in school, or different studies that they don't get to do in school. But it's the things that are consistent are things that have to get done. But then once in a while, you're not happy with the way they behave, so you make them do something as a penalty. Suddenly, they're not happy with doing it. Yesterday, you did it excitedly. Suddenly, I tell you to do it, and you're not happy with doing it. Yeah, because you're making me do something that you don't. If I would need to do this, you'd make me do it every day. You don't make me do it every day. No, you're punishing me. You're doing something. Kids understand that, and I think parents don't really. If my hypothesis is true, and again, it's probably not true 100% of the time, but if it's true in those scenarios, it's true. I don't think any parent is doing this knowingly doing this. I'm not I'm not suggesting parents are doing this knowingly, but subconsciously, this is what's happening. They're giving the message that this isn't as important, and therefore it's more burdensome to the child. Yeah.
When just as long as we're still on that comment. So just a follow up is what I'm finding now is that where I'm teaching now is that the parents, if there's a conflict on one day, say, hey, girl, can you teach my child on a different day?
Because there's a flexibility.
Right. They're trying to say, hey, okay, sports and other activities are important, but so is your Hebrew school. If you have a conflict because it changes in the season and you're now in a different sport, instead of Tuesday, can we do you on Monday or something like that? And my religious director says, the teachers are like pretzels. We try to conform to what the parents are. But
even there, the message is. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, because I'm sure kids wouldn't come if you wouldn't be flexible. So maybe we should do that. But at the same time, we should be aware that we have to count. There's a subliminal message that's coming across that we have to figure out how to counter, because you're not going to change it. You're not going to convince parents Hebrew school is better than baseball practice. Okay, so you're going to have to be flexible. The question is, how do we balance that out by showing the kids this is actually, because the underlying message they're getting is that this isn't as important as baseball. If this was as important as baseball, we would be driving the baseball coaches crazy to change their practice. This wouldn't be an option. This is unnegotiable. This is right. Sandy Koufax didn't play. He didn't consider petitioning the baseball league to change the date of the game. It wasn't an option. Yeah. In other words, he didn't go to his rabbi and say, "Can I fast tomorrow?" It was non-negotiable. Now, obviously, Hebrew school is something. If you're only doing it once a week, then really, is there a problem changing it to tomorrow? No, there's technically no problem. You're getting the same amount in, but at the same time, it's an underlying message. It's a very hidden message, but it's a message that comes from somewhere. It comes because, although it's important, it's probably not as important as the baseball, at least on a surface level. On a surface level, it obviously doesn't rise to the same importance. If it would be, it would be non-negotiable. And even if it is, but we're saying this can't be changed and this can be changed, we have to make sure that message comes across very clearly, that if the Hebrew school wouldn't change, we would choose to send you to Hebrew school and not baseball. But because the Hebrew school is willing to be flexible, so we're changing the date. But the child should know that if this wasn't an option, if the option was between baseball and Hebrew school would be the option. The child has to know that.
Yeah.
If the child doesn't know that, then the child thinks baseball comes first. And that's a message it's in life, things that you've done since you're a child, they're easy to do. Things that you try to start doing as an adult become much harder. You're putting the child at a disadvantage. Telling yourself, I'll let my child pick religion when he grows up. That's like saying, why do I have to train him in gymnastics and baseball as a child? When they go to college, they'll start training. No kids. It's too late. You don't teach a child manners when he grows up. You teach them when they're very, very young. Because once they grow up, children by definition are selfish, right? They grow up, all they want to do is eat, sleep. They want everything to be done for them. You have to teach them. Now, kids pick things up on their own. But try getting a toddler to share their toys the first time a kid comes over. No way. And that's human nature. But this is why we educate children, to teach them how to be human beings, not just academics. We teach them how to be human beings. And if you don't start that at a very young age, You're putting them in it's not 50-50. It's not when they grow up 50-50, I can choose religion or not religion. I can choose to be good or not. If you don't start when the child's a baby, you're not putting them on equal ground. You want to give the child an equal chance, give them as much religion as you can, and then when they turn 18, say, now the choice is yours. Because it's much easier to walk away from religion at 18 than it is to embrace it at 18. Much easier.
Or at age 50-something.
It doesn't matter. Even at age 12, at age 13, the bar mitzvah, it's a very difficult thing for a bar mitzvah because they spent most of, at that point, 100% of their lives with an animal soul. They didn't have a godly soul. Any mitzvah they did was because the parents have an obligation to educate them, to train them. The godly soul fully enters the body at the age of bar mitzvah. That's a very big disadvantage. It's a tremendous disadvantage. That's why officially the age of punishment is till 20, isn't till 20, because how can you punish a kid that you just turned on the light and suddenly you expect him to know all the ins and outs? That makes no sense. Anyway, okay. One more point here, and then we'll continue. Or we could continue. Actually, I have a hard run. However, okay, so we know we have to go to the wedding even though we didn't RSVP, even though we're still in pajamas, we have to go. Yeah. But at the end of the day, at the end of the wedding, there's a bad taste in our mouths that we showed up in pajamas. So why go through it? Why did God create us this way? This is obviously a very deep theological question. It's not just why did God create us this way, it's why did God create the world in general? Good and bad. This whole thing makes no sense. Why put us in this position where we end up at the wedding? In other words, by definition, we are at a wedding in pajamas because we have a soul. The soul came to do God's work, and it's in a body. The body is pajamas, basically. It's not suitable clothing for the soul. The soul has to constantly fight with the body to do what it wants. So, right? So it's going jogging with a suit. It's going to a wedding in pajamas. It doesn't fit. So why put us in that position? Why create the world like this? So this question is going to be addressed in chapters 35, 36, 37. Now, Rebbe is going to address the purpose for which the world was created and why we are here, what our purpose in life is. Here, briefly, the Alter Rebbe is going to touch upon this because it's important for us to come to terms with the fact that we are going to be at a wedding for the rest of our lives, a wedding meaning we are going to be doing mitzvahs, which are cause for celebration. And we're going to finish the celebration, realize we're in pajamas. We still have a body that wants to sin and doesn't want to do the mitzvahs. Every time you leave class, Tanya class, excited, I just spent an hour studying Torah, you realize I still have pajamas on. Yeah, I'm not interested in going and doing the next thing. This is how life is going to be. And unless you're at Tzaddik, which we have to assume we're not, this is how our lives are going to be lived. Every single one of us, every day of our lives. So why do this?
That I think is the reason why it is very difficult for Jewish children who aren't brought up in a Jewish neighborhood. Okay? Because in a Jewish neighborhood, they all do Jewish stuff. But in a non-Jewish neighborhood, they all do non-Jewish stuff, and you're the outlier. So with me, I was told point blank, you will go to Hebrew school no matter what on Wednesday night. Well, that was Little League practice, so I never got to participate ever in Little League, and I was the only one of my friends not in Little League. So that made it very difficult. It puts.
However, the flip side to that is that knowing what you know now, if you were 30 again and you had kids living in that type of neighborhood, you have the opportunity to make your kids feel proud of the choices they're making as opposed to it being a negative. My kids also grow up with not in the neighborhood. They don't get to go to baseball practice. They don't get to go swimming. They don't get to go to a friend's house. They don't get to do anything. All their friends can walk to each other's houses. They all know how to swim. They all can go to gyms and ride their bikes around and do a lot of things. My kids don't get to do that. Now, I'm not saying that this is the choice you should make in life, is to go to a place where your kids are deprived of these types of things. But there's a way to do it that you can make the kids very proud of my kids. They're around their friends. And it's not, so obviously sometimes, it's bothersome that they don't get to do the things their friends do. And other times they're very proud of the fact that they get to come to shul on Shabbos. Sure, their friends are 80, 70, in their 70s and their 60s and their 50s coming in. Those are the people they get to hang out with on Shabbos, but they feel very like it's a big privilege and responsibility to do that. So it's not, it's something that can be used for the positive. Obviously, you wouldn't want to put yourself into that situation. But the question is, why even create that possibility? That's what you're saying. In other words, why even create this possibility? And that's the entire purpose. For whatever reason, and we'll talk about it more at length in a few months, or probably because of Pesach in a few months, the purpose for which God created the world was that he wanted to see souls not be comfortable, because then he could have kept them up there. God wanted to create a world in which souls would change the world, would figure out how to live a godly life in the world, would live in a non-Jewish neighborhood and figure out how to be proud of their Judaism, and so proud that they end up transforming their whole neighborhood, not into Jews, but into being the way God wants them to live. This is why we're here, to take the bodies that want to go the opposite direction of the soul and train them to come to the same direction of the soul, to take the physical world and elevate it to spirituality. This is the purpose for which God created the world. And for that, he had to put the soul in a body that would constantly play the tug-of-war game and try to pull it in opposite directions. And so now, when I want to do a mitzvah, and now I encounter my body saying, I want to go back to sleep. Till now, we said, be happy with the opportunity to do the mitzvah, even though the minute you come back, you'll still want to go to sleep. Ignore that for now. Based on this, now, this is the purpose for which you were created. If your body wouldn't want to go to sleep, you'd be a tzaddik. Now that your body wants to go to sleep, now you have the opportunity to schlep your body with you to the class. And now you've just not only done a mitzvah, you have elevated for an hour. Your body has lived its purpose in this world. It has elevated itself to godliness. And the more often you can do that, the more you're actually accomplishing your purpose in this world. So not only should you not be dampened by that actually makes you even happier, knowing that my body doesn't want to do it. If I was a tzaddik and my body wanted to wake up and come to shul, I wouldn't be doing what God wants in this world. But now that my body is wanting to go back to sleep and I'm able to force it out of bed, this is the best thing that ever happened. It's difficult, but it's the best. Again, this is all based on the foundation of the beginning of the chapter, where the meditation is that my soul is my life. I just have to get over my body. I have to figure out how to deal with my body. Now I'm realizing having to have to deal with my body is what makes me the person I am, is what gives me the opportunity to do what I'm meant to do. So now I won't be sad anymore when the body wants to sin. I'll be happy because this is an opportunity for me to get the body not to sin, even though it wants to sin. And this is the whole purpose for which I was created. Okay. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. We'll finish the text now, but the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe once said gave a metaphor that at the time, this is at the beginning of in the 1920s. Beginning of the 20th century, apparently the train situation in Italy was known to be terrible, disaster. And part of the problem was there was no coordination. So you could have where people board the train, they sit in their seats, and their tickets are punched, and everything is ready to go. The coal is put on, or the wood, whatever they use, the water, everything is ready to go. And the train makes its sound and it starts moving, but someone forgot to connect the locomotive to the rest of the train. So everyone's sitting there and the locomotive is going off on its own. Yeah. This is comparable to up until now. Up until now, we said, be happy with doing a mitzvah, forget about the body. Don't worry about the body. You'll have to deal with that for the rest of your life. Just try to focus on being happy. That's like the locomotive going, the body being left behind. But that's not how a train's supposed to work. A locomotive is supposed to work where you attach it to the body. The soul, the way the soul is really supposed to work is not that the soul should forget about the body, which is what Jews did for thousands of years. Because this was the only way to deal. You fast, you try to negate the body, you try to get the body out of the way so you could focus on your spiritual service. But Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov revealed to us that the whole purpose for creation and what we're waiting for to get to Mashiach is to attach the locomotive to the train. We have to pull the rest of the train with us. For thousands of years, you talk to a non-Jew about Judaism, you'd be killed. Now we have to change the world, and the only way to do that is to engage the world. We have to change our bodies. The only way to do it is to engage it. We have to attach the locomotive to the train and start pulling the train with us. It's much easier for the locomotive to ride on its own if it's not pulling 100 cars behind it. It expends much less gas. But then you're not getting anything done. Then you're just wasting gas on the because if it's just about the soul doing a mitzvah, it should have stayed up there. It could have done many more mitzvahs. So sure, you're saving gas by not attaching it to the train, but you're wasting the little gas you're using because you're not accomplishing anything. Attach to the train and then see where you can go. Yeah, it's going to be slower. It's going to take a lot longer to get started. It's going to be a lot harder to brake. It's going to be a whole different world. But this is why you're a locomotive. This is why you were put here. Okay. One may lend this tshuva, this restoration of his soul to its source, additional strength from the depths of his heart. And likewise, I add a greater measure of light and joy to the joy of his soul brought on by the tshuva. In other words, this guy's running away, right? He's escaping. How do you give him some motivation? How do you get him excited? By comforting his heart from its distress and sorrow through reflecting. Literally, the word that's used in Hebrew is speaking to his heart with knowledge and understanding as follows. That was to meditate the following. Certainly it is true, as said above, that I am utterly remote from God and my body wants to sin, etc. But it was not I who created myself in a manner that permits the divine soul to be exiled within the impurity of the body and animal soul. It was God who created me thus. And as we said, you don't even get the godly soul fully to your bar mitzvah. So this disadvantage that you're experiencing isn't your fault. This is the way you were created. It's not your parents' fault either. This is the way you were created. This is what God wants. Why does God want this? Why then has God done such a thing? To cause the divine soul a part of his light, which fills and encompasses all worlds, and before which all is as naught, to descend into the body and be clothed in the serpent's skin, and a fetid drop, right? A seminal drop. Why did he do this? But the first thing you have to realize is this is no one's fault. It's not your fault, not your parents' fault, not your teacher's fault, not your friend's fault, not your environment's fault. It's God's fault. Because God created you that you could be influenced by your teachers, by your friends, by your environment. If God would have kept you a soul, you wouldn't be able to be. A soul can't be influenced by anything. So God put you in a position where my parents' apathetic view towards Judaism had an effect on me. But God created me that I'm able to be affected by that. So this is all God's fault. Okay, that's the first thing to remember. God did this by design. It's God's fault. So now the question is, why did God do this? What's the purpose? Surely this descent must be for the sake of a subsequent ascent. That is, to elevate to God the entire animating animal soul, which derives from klipat noga, and also its garments of thought, speech, and action. How do we do this? How do you elevate the body? By means of clothing them in the action, speech, and thought of Torah. By using my body to do mitzvahs and study Torah, I'm elevating my body. The subject of this ascent will be discussed further on at length. It will be shown how this is the purpose for which the world was created. It's not just the purpose for which you were created. This is the purpose of everything. Now, if this be so if this is true, that the reason you have this body-soul war is because God created you that way. And God created you that way for a purpose of changing the soul. If this is so, there is one thing for me to do, and this shall be my sole aim throughout my life. I have one thing to focus on, to immerse therein in the thought, speech, and action of the Torah and the mitzvahs, the life of my spirit and soul. As it is written, to you, God, I raise my soul. So now, if this is the whole purpose of creation, whole purpose of my being, that's all I have to do. All I have to do is focus on Torah and mitzvahs. Everything else will fall into place. My kids will turn out okay. My job will turn out okay. Everything will turn out okay. Because as long as I'm focusing on what God wants, then everything else is taken care of.
Mhm.
In practical terms, this means to bind my thought, speech with God's thought and speech, which are, in fact, the very laws which have been set out before us. For the laws of the Torah are God's thought and speech, and by studying them, one binds his own faculties of thought and speech with their divine counterparts. Similarly, with action, I will bind my faculty of action with God's faculty of action through performing the commandments. Just by quick analogy, if I tell my kid to do something, they don't understand it, they don't want it, but they do it. Are they connected to my thought or speech? No, their action is connected to my action because they did something I asked them to do. But let's say I asked my kid to do something, and then he goes and tries to figure out why I asked him to do it. And he tries to understand why I asked him. And he relates to it. And now he wants to do it. And now he does it. Now, it's not just his action that's connecting to my action. His thought connected to my thought because he understood what I understood. His speech, in other words, the way the thought comes down and is processed, because when you think in those terms, you're already using words. His speech connects to my speech and his action connects to my action. So you want to connect to God entirely? You got to study Torah. You got to think about it. You got to do mitzvahs with fear and love, with awe and love. You got to involve every element of your body in this process. And then you've entirely connected yourself to God. For this reason, the Torah is described as that which restores the soul. In other words, it restores the soul to its source and root. Moreover, concerning this occupation in the Torah and mitzvot, which brings joy to the soul by restoring it to its source and which banishes the sadness of its exile in the body and the animal soul, it is written, God's commandments are just, they gladden the heart. Because when I do a mitzvah, I realize I am doing the purpose for which I was created. There's nothing more profound than that. Someone once came into the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe, the Rebbe was talking to him about the importance of getting a Jew to do a mitzvah. Yeah, like asking a Jew to put on tefillin, the importance of getting a Jew to do a mitzvah. So the Rebbe explained the mitzvahs make the person beautiful. So when you get a Jew to put on tefillin, it's like getting him to put on a tie. Makes him beautiful. Why wouldn't you ask a Jew to put on tefillin? So the guy retorted by saying, yeah, that's if the person's clothed. But if the person has no other mitzvahs, that's like putting on a tie on someone who's naked. That wouldn't make the person look beautiful. That would make the person look crazy. So the Rebbe said, yeah, but what happens if a person realizes he's walking around with a tie and no clothing? What's he going to do? Is he going to take off the tie or try to get dressed? He's going to try to get dressed, right? So even though you're right, the first time a person does a mitzvah, they may feel naked. But now that they've experienced the tie, now they want to wear the tie. But they know they can't wear a tie without clothing. So now they're going to go and try to find clothing Now, they might not wear the tie every day until they find the clothing. Maybe they will, because it'll be a constant reminder to get dressed. But so the mitzvah the mitzvah makes a person feel happy when you realize that the mitzvah is why I was created, why I'm here. And that's why most mitzvahs have to do with physical things. Because God created physicality so we can elevate it. We can use it for spirituality. That's why God created this table. So we can study Torah on it. So now when I'm studying Torah and I have to sit by a table, why can't I study Torah in my car and just tune in by ear? I have to come and sit at a table? Yeah, because when you sit at this table, now this table is finding its purpose in life. And you've accomplished your purpose in life. Nothing greater than that. Tomorrow you're going to have another struggle. That will be another opportunity to fulfill another purpose in life. Now at this point, we're ready to move on what true joy really is. How to experience true joy. Because we're unburdened. We're not bothered by anything that might dampen our joy. Before we get to that, in chapter 33, Alter Rebbe is going to break in chapter 32, which is sort of a parenthesis. It wasn't in the first edition in Tanya. Alter Rebbe added it later. And that we'll get to next week, I believe.
Something must have happened that influenced him to add it later.
We will talk about that.
Yeah?
Well, we don't know for sure. We don't know.
Why it's 32, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
But wait,
yes,
there's still
exactly.
more.